Hi, and welcome back to Wounded on Sixes. Today we're going to be taking a very special look at the units for the Tau Empire in the channel's first tier list. So this is going to be only for Tau units. We're not going to be including the Kroot units or any Forge World models. This tier list is simply my opinion, and it's based on how good the units are with the 4 detachments that have rules for Tau units. So that's going to include Kayun, Monka, Retaliation Cadre, and Auxiliary Cadre. Perhaps sometime in the future we'll do a separate tier list for the Kroot and how they work with all these detachments. So the way this tier list is going to be working is it's going to be based on how good a unit is for list building and how many different detachments it works good in. So the more the unit works in more detachments, the higher up on the list it's going to be. The more kind of niche unit only works in certain detachments or certain lists, it's going to be lower down on the tier list. So that's the way we're going to be doing it. The 5 categories are going to be as so. Windmill Slam. These are units that fit into any of the 4 Tau-centric detachments, like we explained before: Kayun, Monka, Red Cad, and Auxiliary Cadre. Good in most attachments are units that see play in most of the attachments, but are maybe not the most efficient in all of them. So just below that Windmill Slam level. Next is decent, and these units are good units, but they kind of only work in certain detachments. Fringe choice are going to be units that are not so great and kind of only work in certain lists, maybe not even full detachments, but certain lists within those detachments. And then finally, dusty are units that are collecting dust because they don't work in really any detachment and they're not very good. So that's the way we're going to be going and rating these. Again, this is just my opinion. Please go ahead and leave your comments down below to let me think what you think I got wrong. Your opinions are definitely just as valid as mine. So first, we're going to start off with the Tau Fire Warrior Strike Team. In my opinion, this is just a decent option. The reason I say that is that it works in certain detachments, but not all of them. It's not a very powerful unit. Its rules are not that great. It's good for cheap OC, is essentially what I think it is. Its datasheet ability is nothing to write home about. You're not really looking to attach a leader to this. It's really good in something like Retaliation Cadre, where you're just looking for some cheap OC or some cheap for the greater good observers. So I think decent is where they kind of belong. Next, we have the Fire Warrior Breachers. Now, these guys are a little bit better. They work in a lot of different lists, a lot of different detachments, particularly Monka, Kayun. I think they're okay in the Auxiliary Cadre. They're to make them work in Retaliation Cadre, in my opinion, is just too much. You just don't have the points to fit them in there. So I'm gonna say they're good in most detachments, but not all. Personally, I think that the breachers are a little overpriced and slightly overrated. Perhaps one day I'll do a video on that, but I think for the most part they're not a bad unit at all, and they really do work in a lot of different spaces. Next, we have the stealth teams, and these guys are going to be an easy windmill slam. These are not only a unit that works in every detachment, but they also should be 3. So all of your Tau Empire list should start down 180 points because you have 3 units of stealth teams. They're just fantastic. The rerolls, the for the greater good, the ability to just hand out all that ignores cover. They infiltrate. They have stealth. They move 8, which is really good for like a little unit. You could kind of just pop them up on top of a building and have them guide over the whole battlefield. They're just fantastic, and every list should have 3 of them. Next, we have the Pathfinder teams. Now, the Pathfinder teams are good, and everybody likes them, and they are a good unit, and they're good in a lot of detachments. So I'm going to put them in good in most detachments. I don't necessarily believe they're a windmill slam, and in my opinion, they're a little pricey. They don't provide any rerolls to anything, even though they do provide two guides for units, so they can guide 2 units in. They also have infiltrate with their recon drone, which is pretty good. They're a little pricey though. 90 points. Again, they can do a lot, but they don't do a lot of damage. They're really just a support unit. Maybe that's why they work so well in so many different detachments, because they are a support unit. I always tend to look to maybe cut them, just because usually when I build my list, I'm building in the ability for a lot of my crisis suits to do the guiding, because they're going to also have marker drones. So a lot of times I'll cut the pathfinders, and in that case, for me, they're a little bit lower at the end of this list, and maybe we'll sort these columns as we go through. But they're definitely good in most attachments. Next, we have the Crisis Suit Star Scythe ability, so our variant, and this is the ones that can take either a flamer or a burst cannon. And this might be the first real controversial placement here, but I'm going to put these guys in decent, because I don't think that they work in all detachments. I think their places in Retcad, and even then, I know a lot of people like to run two. Personally, I run one in my retaliation cadre. They're a good unit, but there's a reason that they're the cheapest crisis suit units. Um, they really only work in retaliation cadre. Um, I guess you could make an argument for something like Kayun, but to me, the only time I'm really bringing them is in retaliation cadre. So for me, they're just a decent choice. Next, we have the Crisis Suits Fire Knives. And these guys, again, maybe in my next controversial opinion, but Windmill Slam, particularly the Missile Knife variants. They're just a fantastic unit. Built in rerolls, 20 shots, can move 30 with an ethereal commanding them, or not an ethereal, I'm sorry, an enforcer commander um, guiding them, leading them. It can be really devastating unit. Strength 7, -1, 2 damage. It works in Monka, works in Kayun, because you have those natural hit rerolls, so you can be procking those buffs right there. It works in Retaliation Cadre for obvious reasons. And in the Auxiliary Cadre, you're getting an extra AP. You can get +2 to the strength, so you can have Strength 9 missiles. It's just an overall fantastic unit. I am building this unit into almost every list that I have. I really like the Missile Knives. I think they're a fantastic choice. Next, we have the Sunforge Crisis Suits, and I think these guys can go here into good in most detachments. Um, they work pretty well. They're fantastic in Retaliation Cadre. Um, you know, I like to bring them in my Monka and Kayun. I mean, I like a nice deep striking option that can take care of a monster or vehicle. Um, they can be very efficient with those rerolls to the wound and damage roll against monsters and vehicles. I tend to run them with a cold star. They tend to be very effective units, and I can count so many games where they have just run roughshod over an enemy's army, and I think they're good in most attachments, if not all. I think they're just going to be. I think we're going to put them right here at the top of good in most attachments. They're just fantastic. They're just really good. It's weird to see this discrepancy in the three Crisis teams, but this, again, just my opinion based on the list that I like to build after playing as many games as I have with Tau in 10th edition. So next we have the Broadside Battle Suit, and this is a good unit. It's got a lot going for it. It's got a good gun. I really prefer the railgun over the missile or the missile sides, but um, it's a very strong unit, and it works in most attachments. You'd be happy to see this in most of your detachments. Um, it works particularly well in things like Kayun, because you can start them off the board, bring them on later. Um, Getting sustained hits on those rail rifle shots can be really disgusting. It also kind of they work in Monka, although I think there's probably better options there. They certainly can work in Retaliation Cadre, and they can be pretty effective in the Auxiliary Detachment too, just because the +2 to the strength from the Guided Fire stratagem and extra AP makes it so that they're hitting like a hammerhead. They could be a really tough, potent unit too. They got a lot of wounds. They have a 4-up feel no pain for devastating and mortal wounds. They can be a hard unit to shift, and they can really hold hold down a corner. And they kind of have a pretty small profile on the battlefield too, which is really nice. Next up is the Ghost Keel, and I love the Ghost Keel. I think it's one of the best units in the Tau Codex, and I am building it into every list that I have now. It just works. It works in Cayenne because there's so many different stratagems that work with it to give it uppy downy, let it come off the board, come back on. It can just do everything. It's decent in Monka because you can get some extra damage in from the lethal hits on its kind of underpowered guns. It's fantastic in Retaliation Cadre. It's a good screener. It can't be attacked unless they're in your Retcad range. It is can really tank shots with its stealth drones. It's very good in the auxiliary cadre, an extra AP to all of its weapons, the guided fire stratagem, making its weapons that much more powerful, making it a real anti-tank piece. You can do everything you want to with the ghost kills in any one of these detachments. So that's why for me, when I'm building a list, ghost kills are a windmill slam. So next up, we have the devilfish. Now, I enjoy the devilfish. I enjoyed it more when devilfish were a little bit cheaper. I'm not going to judge the devilfish on the breacher fish combo because that would be kind of unfair if we did it exactly like, well, just because it works with the breacher fish combo, it should be good in most attachments. Although breachers are good in most attachments, and you're going to be bringing the breachers in every detachment where you're bringing breachers, you're going to be bringing the devilfish. The devilfish on itself is kind of just a decent option. Now, yes, if I'm bringing breachers, I'm going to bring one of these. Chances are, if I'm not bringing breachers, I'm probably not bringing a devilfish. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that are like, well, you could bring Pathfinders and Darkstrider and do the Grundy maneuver. Certainly can. In my list building, though, I'm never starting off with a devilfish in there. It's kind of an afterthought. Like, oh, do I need that type of unit? And a lot of times I'm finding myself picking crisis suits over the breacher combo anyway. So devilfish I'm finding less and less room for them in my list. So I think I'm just going to put it as at decent because it's certainly not fringe. There's a lot of lists that use devilfish. It's our main transport vehicle. So I'm not going to say that it's a fringe choice by any stretch, but I also am not going to bump it up to good in most attachments just because you're kind of always bringing them with breachers. Next, we have the Piranha, and I'm a big fan of the Piranha. I have been for since the beginning of the edition because it's so cheap, it's so fast, it's got a scout move, it's surprisingly got some really decent anti-tank, and it works in a lot of different detachments, particularly Monka. Some of you may have seen some of my older videos in my feeding fish strategy, and piranhas were a big part of that feeding fish strategy. But they're also a really decent unit in Cayenne for kind of giving you something to do turn one and turn two. They're pretty decent in retaliation cadre too because you can use them to move block or do something turn one before all of your crisis suits come down. They're a great anti-tank option, and I could see some play inside of an auxiliary cadre for them too. I mean, they have a lot of utility because they're super cheap and they can do a really unique thing. They're really fast and they have some really good anti-tank. So there's also the Alpha Strike ability with them where you could just, spam them and shoot a bunch of secret missiles. So there's a lot of play and there's a lot of ways you can work this into many different lists and many different attachments. So we're going to put this in good in most attachments. Next, we have the Riptide, and the Riptide is a pretty controversial model, if you ask me. It was definitely way better in ninth edition. It was way more powerful, but it's also really good in 10th edition too. It is got a lot of wounds. It's got a really decent set of guns. It's not the best anti-tank piece, but it can be made into a very good anti-tank piece in a lot of different attachments. It's a great screening unit, kiting unit, because it can fall back and shoot. It can stay in combat and shoot without penalty. Um, it could do a lot of different things for you. So, again, you could build this into a lot of different lists. There are certain lists it's not super efficient in. If you ask my opinion, it's not the best in retaliation cadre. I know a lot of people think it is, but it's not. Go and see my videos on that. So I'm going to put this in decent in most detachments because it is. It's a very good in almost any list that you build. Not exactly a windmill slam. Like I said, there's certain detachments, certain lists I'm not going to bring it in, but um, I'm going to be starting out with some Riptides on most lists that I'm building. So next we have the Hammerhead, and I love the Hammerhead. I've loved it ever since I started playing Tau. It's one of my favorite units, but I have played it a lot, especially recently, and I think it's got to go into decent. Um, its role has become less and less in the codex and in list building over time. I think a lot of that has to do with some of the different rule changes, the prevalence of retaliation cadre as being, much more popular detachment than it was when it first came out. So there's a lot of that anti-tank is being taken up by Sunforge units. In the auxiliary detachment, especially, there's a lot of ways to get the strength of weapons up higher now, so a lot more things can be anti-tank. Um, and the hammerhead can be swingy, as accurate as it can be. I've seen it fail me so many times, and it's only one shot. And if you don't get that six, they're gonna get their invul on it. Sometimes it's disgusting, sometimes it's not. So for me, I find myself cutting it a little bit more than I usually do. It can work in most attachments. That's the thing, is that it works in most attachments. It's just I don't know how great it is in most attachments. So that's why I'm putting it into the decent category. So now we're going to move on to the Skyray, and I kind of had the opposite feeling about the Skyray as I do the Hammerhead. I think it's good in most attachments. Um, it's premium anti-tank. You get a free reroll to the hit. It's twin linked. It's 15, strength 14, -3, D6 +1 missiles a game. It's especially good against flying units. Magnus, Mortarion, Sacrosancts. I mean, any big flying unit just hates to see a Skyray because they're just so good and they have anti-fly. It's just really, really fantastic unit. So, premium anti-tank. I think it's good in most detachments. Maybe not a windmill slam. Again, there's so much good anti-tank in this codex now. You probably don't need to slam them in every list, but they're close. They're very, very close to that. So next we have the Storm Surge, and while I think the Storm Surge is a great looking unit, it's got a lot of weapons. It can do a lot. The rules of the Codex just do not work for this unit. They just don't. Um, because you can't split fire, you're mostly going to blow up whatever you target, and you're going to waste shots. That's not to say that it's not a good unit. It is. It definitely has some uses, but to me, this is a fringe choice because you're really only going to use this in certain lists where you're trying to do a very particular thing. It's 400 and something points. I think it's 400 points if I'm not mistaken for this unit. So it is. Yeah, 400 points for the Storm Surge. It's just a lot. I could see it maybe working in like a Cayenne where, you could be getting even more value from those sustained hits. But again, I think it's a really, really big fringe choice. So next we have the Razor Shark Fighter. I think this is just going to be an easy dusty. Air flyers are just not that great. Um, there was a time where maybe people were considering this, but I just don't see it. And I think we're going to do the same for the Sunshark Bomber. The Bomber was way better last edition. Probably put it into French Choice or even decent, but this is the way the Flyers are working in 10th edition. It's just not really worth it. So now we're moving on to the leaders and characters here. And first up, we have the Ethereal. The ethereals are overpriced, if you ask me. They just are. They just cost too many points, and I think they definitely need to come down a little bit for them to be a little bit more usable. To me, they're kind of like a fringe choice. There's certain lists where it may work. Um, I know some people are like, well, you get an extra CP, and that does happen, and it can be really useful. But I think there's only certain lists where you're really looking for that when you're trying to build out for a certain stratagem, which I do. I do this often. A lot of my list building is built on stratagems of a detachment, so they can be decent, but I think there's better options out there. Next, we have Darkstrider, and I think Darkstrider had his time in the sun early in the edition, particularly when we just had Kayun. Um, but and then he even got a lot of play after the Grundy maneuver was a big thing out there. If people aren't aware of the Grundy maneuver, I encourage you to go find the Pure Tide podcast channel and research that Grundy maneuver. And Dark Strider was a big part of that combo. Although, like I said, I think he's a decent choice, but I think he kind of really only works in like Kayun. Is probably where he works best. He does have that deep strike denial bubble, which is something that the Tau really like, I guess. But I think he works really just well in Kayun. But there's a lot of different lists that you could build him in Kayun. So we're gonna put him in decent because he does work well in one detachment. You can make arguments for others, and he can work in multiple lists. So he's above fringe choice for me, but because he doesn't work in all the detachments or multiple detachments outside of Kayun, I'm just gonna put him in decent. So next up we have Shadow Sun, and at the beginning of the edition, I really liked Shadow Sun. She was the poor man's way to get rerolls. Because if you weren't one of the people that jumped on the hype train for the Tetras, Shadow Sun was a big deal in the beginning of the edition. But I don't think she's that useful now. She's good in. She can be good in certain detachments, but not in every list. She's very, very situational. It really depends on how you're building your list. Um, so to me, she's a fringe choice because while her ability's great, she's not exactly needed anymore with the prevalence of stealth suits and fire knives having their own built-in rerolls. Like, she can be useful if you're going to be playing the big gun line type list, a Monka list with a lot of gun line or something like that. She could be a fun choice in a retaliation cadre list, but ultimately she's a fringe choice at best. Next, we have the Farsight Marksman team, and this is going to go down the dusty here. I just don't see the need for the precision weapon. It's not super. It's not super good. Um, I I don't necessarily believe the precision is something that we really need for the most part. We're just trying to kill, kill, kill. It's cheap. You can put it in there, but I don't know. To me, it's sitting on the shelves. Next, we have the Cadre Fireblade. Now, the Fireblade kind of falls into the same category as the Devilfish. To me, you're only bringing the Fireblade if you're bringing the Breachers, and then if you're bringing the Breachers, you're bringing the Devilfish. So I'm going to put the Fireblade in decent because, you know, although he works well with the Breachers, the same argument applies for the Devilfish. We're not going to bump him up to that because honestly, without the breachers, he'd probably be fringe choice at most. So we'll put him in the decent category. So next we have the Cold Star Commander, and I think that this is also one of those units that just goes in great in most attachments. Not quite all. Some, I personally like to run my fire knives with enforcers, so that's why the Cold Star is not a windmill slam for me, but it's in a lot of the lists that I build. Like a lot of the lists I build have the Cold Star, so he's good in a lot of detachments, just like the fire knives or the Sunforge can be, and you can kit them out similar. Personally, I run my Cold Star in a Sunforge with Quad Fusion, but that's just the way I like to run them. The Enforcer, I'm going to put in good in most attachments as well. I mean, it's a great leader, especially for the fire knives, giving them protection. I like to, it's almost like walking cover, and then it actually makes cover better because now you need like AP3 to save on anything worse than a 3. So it's really, really decent unit there. I really like the Enforcer. He doesn't get as cool a weapon options, like he doesn't get the high output burst cannon like the Cold Star. So and the assault is really, really nice, but he really helps to protect your crisis suits way more than the Cold Star does. So I think they're both kind of neck and neck in good in most attachments. And then finally, Commander Farsight. I like Farsight, one of my favorite models in my collection. But to me, he's just decent. Kind of a fringe choice sometimes. I think that he really works best in Retaliation Cadre, and that's kind of where it ends. Like he's really good in Retaliation Cadre. Like he should always be in your Retaliation Cadre list. But I don't know. I just don't tend to build lists with Farsight in them unless I'm building a Retaliation Cadre list. So to me, that lands him in decent as being good in one detachment and in many different lists in that detachment, but not good in multiple detachments. So that's why we're going to put them there. So in terms of ordering here, I think this is great for Windmill Slam. I think I wouldn't change anything here. I would probably put the Commanders here. I'd probably put the Riptide and like this. Probably put the Pathfinders back here. Probably put the Breachers back here. I think Farsight's good where he is. I like the Hammerhead a little bit more than I like the Pathfinders, but I like the Pathfinders more than them. Uh, I'm gonna take the Cadre. I'm gonna put the Cadre Fireblade over Darkstrider just because I think he works in more spots there. Um, this is about right, and yeah, this is about right. So yeah, this is what I have here. This is my tier list of the Tau units that work best in multiple detachments and multiple lists. So go ahead and like and subscribe if you haven't, and please leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this list. How do you see it? What changes would you make? And go ahead and please be kind. Again, this is just my opinion, and I really do appreciate you all tuning in. And come back for more Wounded on Sixes.